We're in downtown St. Louis at the Eads Bridge, one of many bridges up and down the Mississippi River, several here in St. Louis, but this is the one that's so important for people to know and understand. The bridge really today is sort of forgotten by a lot of people. They don't realize that it's the oldest remaining bridge across the river. You know, it's over 145 years old. We kind of forget that it was the symbol of St. Louis. Now the symbol of St. Louis and westward expansion is the Gateway Arch. When the bridge was built, it was one of those great engineering marvels at the time that people just loved and ate up. James Eads built this bridge between 1867 and 1874, and it remains today as one of the most important bridges across the Mississippi River, in fact, in the United States, and is acknowledged around the world as an engineering feat, and a beautiful one at that. There was a ferry operating here 70 years before this bridge was built. St. Louis is this hub of activity because of its connections to other rivers in the system. But if you were operating a business on the other side of the river, or you were bringing cargo in by train, it had to stop and be transferred to a ferry and then brought across. As early as the 1830s, there was the concept of having a bridge put here, but it was considered to be impractical because it would have to be a very, very large suspension bridge hanging the road deck from above. There was just no financing for something as elaborate as that, and none of that technology had really been put to the test. So Eads came here in 1833. He was only 13 years old. He came here with his mom and a sister, and he was coming to the landing on a steamboat from Indiana when the steamboat caught fire, and the family actually had to leave a burning boat as it's sinking and reaching the levee. By the age of 16, he's working nearby and really teaching himself engineering. For a while, he's working on the steamboat called the Knickerbocker, which is going up to Galena and pulling lead out of the mines there and bringing it back to St. Louis for refining. He's doing that for 3 years and learning a lot about how the river works. A lot of boats sank because they hit snags in the river, logs washing down. They also blew up because of boiler explosions and these high-pressure boilers. And many, many thousands of dollars of cargo were being lost routinely. So in the 1840s, 1842, Eads goes into the salvage business with 2 others that had already been operating on the river. There, Eads, as a very young man, 22 years old, he is learning the bottom of the river. This is an intimate relationship with the river that very, very few people have. Because the salvage operations were going down to find those boats that are already buried in silt and mud, they have to find where those boats are. He innovates the invention of a diving bell, and he and other workers can go down in this bell and walk at the river bottom and find where the salvageable material is. In that experience, he learns how the river is moving the silt along and dynamic in a different way on the bottom. So he learns there how things change and how important it is that anything you put in the river be connected and attached to the rock that's under the riverbed. By the time he's working on snag boats in 1855, there are over 1 million people coming and going from St. Louis every year by steamboat. By 1861, the United States is in the Civil War, and he's contracted by the Union government to build ironclads and tinclads for the war effort. This is happening just south of here in Carondelet. And then by the time the war concludes, they want to have this bridge built finally in order to capture some of the railroad trade that Chicago had really taken over. So there are many firsts and superlatives about this bridge. It's a bridge that had to be built during the steamboat era, when boats by the hundreds were coming up and down the river and needed to continue to pass without the obstruction of a bridge in their way or the obstruction of the construction of a bridge. Eads' study of bridges in Europe told him that a truss bridge like this that has these arches between these piers was going to be much stronger than a suspension bridge. So other bridges had been built in a similar manner, but to do this, he had to go all the way down to bedrock to stabilize it, and this was something that nobody had done or knew how to do yet. We're on a cliff face, you might say, or bluff on this side of the river, but on the other side, it's floodplain, and the bridge had to go down all the way to bedrock over 100 feet below the water's surface. This was something unheard of to this degree. No one had built that, so he constructed caissons, pneumatic caissons made out of iron and steel that would sit on the river bottom where men would work away, scouring out the bottom of the river, pulling out rock and silt and bringing it up to the surface by way of sand pumps, special pumps that he had created that would vacuum this material up. So the caisson's like a great big steel box. It's like a small building, not very tall, very dark inside. The air is dank and hot. There's machinery operating. It must have been very, very hard to work there. It must have been very, very loud and dirty and difficult to breathe. So to get in the caissons, these workers had to descend down a spiral stairway, down, down, down in these piers that are being constructed above them. The stoneworks are being built above, and there are boats all around this to stabilize it and hold the derricks and the machinery and the sand pump. There are over a dozen people that died. Often men who worked in the caissons developed an illness because of the intense air pressure that had to be pushed into those spaces well below the river surface. So there was a tremendous amount of air pressure that forced nitrogen into their blood, which boiled when they came to the surface and caused them something called the bends. So this was the first time that bends, or caisson disease, was really understood. Eads employed his personal doctor to look into this. His doctor recommended that they stop coming up too quickly and that would help them, which it did, and has continued to be a way in which that's managed for scuba divers and others working at high pressures. The bridge is sourced from many materials across the United States, but they all came here by way of the river. There's limestone from nearby Grafton, Illinois. There's granite from Portland, Maine, and Richmond, Virginia, brought here by boats. 2 of those boats sank around the coast of Florida, and upon that loss, Eads and others discovered that there was granite not very far away in Missouri that they brought up to use to encase the east and west abutments and part of the piers in the middle of the river. Other material sourced through the river system is iron and steel brought from Pittsburgh down the Ohio River and up the Mississippi to St. Louis. James Eads commissioned special steel to be used in the construction of the bridge, chromium alloyed steel, which had never been used before. And he used these tubular support systems for the archways that had never been employed to this extent before. So if you look at the roadbed and the archways, those were built from above. After those were constructed, the false works were taken away. All of those wood timbers were taken away, like a second bridge, actually. Over 1,500 people worked on this bridge. Over 24 boats were being used. It's made of also parts that are replaceable. So he knew that there are times when you might need to take something out and fit it back together again. This was heavily resourced to build something that a lot of people didn't think could be done. People did not think a bridge would last here. Prior to its being built, people thought that it was sort of a folly, many people did. But the precept that he put forth, which was the bridge would stand as long as people found it to be a practical application and something useful to them, it still exists that way for us. And this is something that is a beautiful addition to the cityscape. There are lots of bridges here, right in proximity, that people travel more often. There are highway bridges that just aren't much to look at, but if you take the time and you go across the bridge on the metro system, or in a car, or by bicycle or on foot, you can take your time and see the city and understand it from a different perspective as being part of the Mississippi River's location and legacy.